Konstantin Kisin and Francis Foster host the TRIGGERnometry Show in London, where, as they say, they have honest conversations with fascinating people. Both comedians, what I love about these guys is their ability to stay sane and serious when necessary, and to crack a joke at just the right moment to break the tension. Konstantin was born in Russia, and since moving to the UK has been deemed a Jewish Nazi for stepping outside some very strictly drawn boundaries by woke comics.
I am the only Jewish Nazi comedian in the world.
And Francis, being half Venezuelan, is known for his show Mixed Race White Bloke. But our interview transcends identity politics. We talk about Western privilege and ask, what country are we living in? Russia or the UK? China or the United States of America? Constantine also explains why he shies away from the term moral courage, and Francis shares his intentions for their YouTube show moving forward. Learning about this journey from woke comedy clubs to a culture of authenticity in a time of cowardice. I'm Sienna May Heath, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. Well, Konstantin and Francis, thank you for coming on today. This is really a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I really admire the work that you're doing through comedy and, of course, through your show, TRIGGERnometry, in which, as you say, you have honest conversations with fascinating people. And I believe you are also one of those people, truly fascinating and authentic. And I think that theme of authenticity and having moral courage, when it seems so few have that to practice in our society, is something I'd like to focus on in our talk today. And I think that's why you're really a perfect fit for this series, which, as you know, is called Leaving the Left for Liberty, which it seems you have both done. Yeah.
I love the way she said that we are one of those people. So between the two of us, we're half an authentic person each put together. Yeah. We become one.
Together, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
With the help of Papa Stalin in the background, of course.
Yeah.
Well, a hero of the left.
I wonder, I'm always the one that tends to take issue with stuff. I wonder whether it's accurate to say that I've left the left, because I'm not sure I was ever on the left. And I think with you, have you left the left?
I mean, they think I've left the left.
So you've left the left.
So yeah. I've left. Right. So I've been purged.
You're half right there.
Yeah. I would say it sounds like you've been excommunicated.
Yeah. It's they took my card, they ripped it up in front of my eyes, and they firmly showed me the door, along with a variety of other people.
He's not bitter at all.
No, I'm not bitter.
I don't even think you're exaggerating, honestly. I feel like we should dig deep on that. All right, so just a little bit about the series to get us oriented and anyone who's watching. Leaving the Left for Liberty will tell the stories of several whistleblowers, dissidents, and other alternative voices, such as yourselves, who have, in a sense, perhaps left the political left for more creative freedom, personal freedom, and professional freedom. And while not necessarily leaving the left for the right, or even leaving at all, these sort of in-between voices are classically liberal, independent, and libertarian. And they are cutting ties with the dogma. In essence, they're in search for something fresh, something new. And in my view, as someone who's publicly left the left for liberty and gotten a lot of slack about it, what makes people like you guys especially heroic in this time is in the way that you're rising above the modern day witch hunt with moral courage. Yeah, and what's interesting is that the theme I'm seeing among people such as yourselves is you're organically following the hero's journey. And there are three main steps to that. There's the departure of leaving the familiar world behind. There's the initiation of learning to navigate a new world. And then there's the return to the familiar world in the sense of coming home to an authentic self transformed.
And the hero's journey, is that a Joseph Campbell idea?
Yeah, and it's something that we see in so many films and movies and in life. I think especially now.
It's a big thing in tarot as well, the hero's journey.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
You know, no, I read a lot of Joseph Campbell Wells at university, but it very nicely describes a journey that we've been on. For instance, when we were in comedy, particularly in the mainstream comedy industry, it was taboo to say certain things. It was taboo to basically criticize certain ideas. And we found ourselves essentially not being able to say what we thought and felt because it would harm your progress within the career, within the industry.
Yeah.
And it just comes a point where you've just got to think to yourself, you know, do I want to be honest? Do I want to say what I think and feel? Or do I want to live my life essentially muzzled, unable to say what I think? And I think it just came to a point with both of us where we were bored of that and we were tired of it.
And I also think, Sienna, as well, you know, you described the hero's journey very well, as, you know, leaving the village or being cast out of the village and then being in the desert and wandering in it and trying to work out what you think and what you're going to do with your life. And then the third step is coming back to the village, being a different person, essentially. And I think we are probably still kind of halfway between stage 2 and 3, because when you are, when you do find yourself either cast out or you voluntarily exiled yourself from the village, it's an unpleasant process, and you have to take some time to process the bitterness and the resentments and the frustrations.
I'm not fucking bitter.
and all of that stuff that you have. And only when you've done that can you then have a constructive role if you ever want to return and actually make a difference. And I think that's a part that I think often gets missed, which is the need to process your own shit, essentially, if you don't mind me saying it in that way, which a lot of people forget about. I think it's very tempting for all of us to kind of go, well, I used to be in this team and now I'm going to rail against them for being so evil and nasty and bad. Actually, I don't think that's necessarily that helpful, even though I'm not sure that on an individual level you can ever avoid that process. I think you kind of have to go through it and come out of the other side going, actually, I've let go of any attachments that I had. I've let go of any anger and resentments and whatever that I had about those people. And I think it's easier. It's easier if you never really attached yourself to that camp in the first place. I've never been a fan of camps in general, my Jewish heritage mainly. But, I've never been a fan of being tribal in this way. But most people are tribal. We are tribal by nature. And so to be cast out of your tribe is a very painful thing. And you have to process that pain before you can become a constructive contribution to the society in which you live, which hopefully is the end of that journey for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, part of becoming transformed or being transformed in that process is working through, as you said, your own shit. There's actually, you had mentioned on your interview with BBC that the one thing that we're not talking about that we really should be is mental health, what has happened to all our brains in the past 18 months or perhaps more than that. What work are you doing mentally in this time, and might you suggest for others who are being brave as you are?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily for people who are being brave. I think for everybody, I have found from probably the age of 23, 24, I've always been doing various kind of personal development, whether I studied hypnotherapy for a long time, I studied things like NLP. And by the way, not all of them are equally useful or even useful necessarily, but the journey through it teaches you quite a lot about who you are. So I always thought that, in the same way that you want to look after your physical health, your mental health is just the same. You want to be kind of tuning it up as much as you can. And I think that's important, whoever you are and whatever your role in life is.
And I think it's also important to realize what we've all been through with the pandemic. The person who you started this entire process is now fundamentally different from the person you are at the end. I saw lots of posts from people saying, and then we're going to come back out of it and we're going to be coming back to normal and then life's going to restart exactly as it was. And that was never going to happen. And those people were in denial. Now, it's very incredibly understandable that they would be in denial. I think the vast majority of us, when we entered lockdown, we sort of had a period of mourning. But also you need to see this process as an opportunity and realize that when you come out of this, having spent so much time on your own, having lived a fundamentally different life for so long, for a year and a half or the best part of it, you are going to come out of that a different person. And as a result of that, it's up to you what you come out as. Do you want to come out better? Do you want to come out more honest? Do you want to actually look inwards and realize what you truly want from life and make changes to achieve that goal? Or do you want to go back to your old life and go back as if nothing has happened, when the reality is a lot has happened and you might have missed some wonderful opportunities as a result?
Right. What a waste it would be to go back to having life the way that it was, because this has been terrible for a lot of people, but also the opportunities within are there too, right? And it has been for a lot of people. I think there's been the possibility of changing certain things, the way you do things. For me, for example, it was an opportunity to spend more time with my wife and family, and it was important. It was something I'd been neglecting, and it was having consequences which were not going to lead anywhere good. And I've been able to address that as a result. And likewise for Francis, I think he's really grown a lot over this time as well. We both have. So I think there's always that possibility that even things that are not good are going to have that opportunity for you. And we've tried as best as we've been able to capitalize on that. Even though I'll be honest with you, Sienna, there's been plenty of times we've sat around here, Francis, myself, and our producer Anton, and we've kind of gone, which country are we moving to? Because whatever is going on in this country is unacceptable. But even within that, we've also tried to nonetheless do the best to grow our show, to grow as people, to develop and improve. And I think that attitude is important. It's always going to be important, no matter what else is happening around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And here in the US, across the pond from you in the UK, we often ask those questions like, what country are we living in? And we are faced with a treacherous ideological landscape in the Western world at large. So I think it's rather controversial for people to step out and show themselves as individuals rather than as a collective or some sort of hive mind. So what's inside of you, do you think, that gravitates that moral courage, that drives you to exercise moral courage?
I wouldn't really call it a drive for moral courage. I guess I just got tired of shutting my mouth. And there are certain things, like, particularly being in an industry as woke as comedy, where you'd go, okay, I'll let that slip. I'll let that slide. And then eventually you go, no, hang on a second. For me, it was when the terms old white man was used as a pejorative, as an insult. And old white man therefore meant that your time had gone, that you were stale, racist, stupid, bigoted. And I just got sick of that being used as an insult. And it came to a point where I just started speaking my mind. And immediately what you saw it was very interesting. I wrote a Facebook post about it and saying, that if you use this term, you're just as bigoted as the people that you're accusing, if they are bigoted in the first place. And I use the example of my dad. My dad in the 70s married my mother, who was a woman, an immigrant, a woman of color. She's from Latin America. And I was saying that my dad was none of these things that you accused him of, yet he voted Brexit. But and the reasons he voted for Brexit were actually good reasons. He didn't believe in the EU project. He believed there'd been an overreach. He believed that mass immigration, freedom of movement didn't work for society, particularly a society which had a very large social welfare system. And these people were just smearing him. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I had enough. And then bit by bit, once you make that first step, you start seeing other things that you think are unacceptable. And you start speaking out. And before you know it, you're on a path. But I will say this, and one can only talk from personal experience. The path that I've ended up on is far more rich. It's more invigorating. It's far better than the path I was on before, where even if I'd become a success as a comedian, I would have ended up resenting it because it would have been success on somebody else's terms.
And I always cringe a little bit whenever people talk about moral courage and put us in that context, Sienna, because to me, what we're doing, I mean, look, when I think of courage, I think of My
Me.
family, you,
Yeah.
Yeah, only when there's a plate of pasta in front of you, mate, you smash through it with courage. But look, joking aside, I mean, you know, I think of my family who, you know, fought Nazis on the Eastern Front in one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, who spoke out against Stalin or the Soviet authorities, who went to the gulags for what they believed. I don't think we belong in that conversation. And so for me, you know, I'm even getting emotional thinking about it. But for me, when I think about those people and the sacrifices that they made and the things that they did, to talk about courage in our modern world mostly is preposterous, right? And so to me, you know, for example, when I, as a comedian, I got offered this behavioral agreement contract to perform at a university, which I turned down, and people, oh, so brave. I didn't feel that way. I just thought, well, of course that's what you do, because freedom of speech is such an important value of Western civilization. Of course I would defend it. Of course, as a comedian, you know, there's a whole history of the Richard Pryors and the Bill Hickses and the George Carlin, and you could go down the list of comedians who thought actually it's quite important for people to be able to say what they think and to make jokes and whatever. So I understand that, yes, at the individual level, it feels like you're risking a lot. But I think when you think about it historically, even within lifetimes, I can talk to my grandmother, who's 94 years old now, who lived through all those things that I mentioned. So when I talk to her, it just puts things in a context where I'm like, yeah, this isn't really that scary, or this isn't really that big a deal, because I know that this is triviality. You know, speaking your mind in modern society, no one's burning us at the stake. No one is coming to put us in a camp, not yet, at least, etc. So, you know, we're not in that position. And I think, given all of that, it should be very easy for all of us. I really do genuinely believe that, to purge these demons of fear from our mind and just to speak the truth.
Yeah, fair enough. That does put it into perspective, and it brings to mind that incident that I wonder if many people know, even in America, what happened to you, Konstantin, when you when you had that moment where they gave you a laundry list of things that you were not allowed to joke about. Would you like to reiterate that list?
Well, very briefly, I was asked to perform at a college here in London. And when I agreed to do this was to raise money for charity. Essentially, they asked me to donate my time as a comedian to help them raise money for charity. And when I agreed, they sent me what they called a behavioral agreement form, which by signing which I would agree to stay. I think they had, the rules were, they had a zero tolerance policy, as they said, on racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism. And it also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind. I turned it down. I tweeted about it to like 800 followers at the time. And suddenly, but within about 2 or 3 days, it became one of the biggest news stories in the country. And it was actually covered around the world. Even people like Tucker Carlson, he had me on his show to talk about it. So he got quite a lot of coverage. And I think it had nothing to do with comedy at the point I was trying to make, without much success at the time. I think the reason it resonated with so many people was that ordinary people often now in Western society feel like they are subject to a contract like that. And anything they say can and will be used against them in the court of public opinion, by their employer, by their colleagues, by their friends. Everybody walks around being afraid to say what they think. And it's not just evil right-wing bigots who feel that way, you know, in quotes. It's also ordinary people. You know, I talk to a lot of people who are, you know, even progressive or on the left. They feel scared to say something that doesn't quite fit with the dogma. So a lot of people are very worried about expressing themselves. And I think my situation with that contract mapped very well onto people's pre-existing concerns, which is why it became quite a big story. But as I say, you know, I never saw that as some kind of great act of moral courage and resistance. I just thought, I actually, very naively, Sienna, very naively, but I thought every comedian would do this, wouldn't they? And then what happened was I was actually attacked mostly by comedians for doing this. So the general public, ordinary people, were massively on my side, got literally thousands of messages from people saying, thank you for doing this, blah, blah, blah. but it was comedians who attacked me for doing this, because apparently I was, you know, I don't know what they thought I was supposed to do. Maybe I was supposed to do what they all do, which is fall in line with the progressive dogma that exists in comedy at the moment. I didn't think that, you know, I didn't think that was the right thing to do, and that's why I turned it down. But it was quite a journey of discovery for me about the industry that I was in, and I think the rupture between me and the comedy world really started for me then, because I saw it for what it was, essentially a bunch of conformists pretending to be rebels, a bunch of people who are bought deeply into the system, who think they are fighting against the system. But actually, the thing that they want most of all is to be the system, to become the system, and at no point to actually risk or challenge anything at all, because they're all terrified and they're all scrapping for some modicum of success. So that was quite a disillusioning process for me about the industry that I was operating in.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm with you there. And I recall, Konstantin, that after that incident, you did a set called Jewish Nazi. Is that right?
Well, it was the basis for a whole show that I did, which was called Orwell That Ends Well. It was an hour-long comedy special that I did a few years ago. Yeah, it gave me a lot of material, for sure.
Yeah. And also, Francis, you did one called Mixed Race White Bloke, which I really was so fond of, because I'm a sort of a mixed race white woman. I'm half Persian, and I saw that, and it was so endearing, but also I just appreciated it too, like to have some satire around the absurdity of the narrative around race these days, where everything is so boxed in, so strict, and it's funny how a group of people who tend to pride themselves on fluidity are actually very strict in their dogma and in their way of policing comedians, among other creatives. So why is it immoral or just plain wrong to police artists or any individual this way?
Well, it's because, number one, on a very basic level, what will be produced by the artist will invariably be crap. Because an artist is at their best when they're free. If you think about all the people that you love, it doesn't matter who they are, whether they're a novelist, whether they're a comedian, or, you know, whether a singer-songwriter, they were able to produce their art because they felt free to be able to do that. They felt free to explore ideas. They felt free to be able to express themselves in the truest, most authentic manner possible. The playwright David Mamet said in one of his books about acting, words that come from the heart go to the heart. And if you think about the words that you love by your favorite artists, that will always be the case. So by saying to artists that you have to adhere to these tight rules, this legislation, you are not allowed to, you know, make jokes about X subject, then you're completely removing the fangs of the artist, which to me is where all great art is. It's the bite, it's the, I can't believe he or she said that, I can't believe they did this. You know, having a taboo and then addressing the taboo, and then by doing that, making the taboo actually a place or a subject that we can all discuss. That's, for me, the real purpose of the artist. And by doing and saying that you can only talk about these certain things, what you're doing is producing art that will never be truly great. And that's not to say that you can't have, for instance, observational comedy in the style of Jerry Seinfeld, Michael McIntyre, that is very good and that people will enjoy. But you will also take away the Pryors, the Hickses, the Joan Rivers, the people that were actually great in another way. And what will happen then is that people will leave the art form or will not consume it. And we've seen that with comedy here in the UK, particularly on the BBC, where viewers and listeners to that type of content have just plunged, because people realize and know that it's not honest, it's not unfiltered, it's got a political message that is incredibly overt at the expense of the comedy, and as a result it's rubbish and people don't want to listen to it or see it.
Yeah, authenticity seems to be increasingly rare these days, and I wonder why that is. why is it that, and I hesitate to use the word courage again, because I knew that ruffled your feathers, Constantine, but
no, it didn't ruffle my feathers. I know what you're saying when you talk about courage, because it's all in the mind, right? If you perceive a tiny spider as the most terrifying thing in your life, then you will run away and scream, right? And so your mind makes it seem like courage. I hear you completely. And I felt at times that some of the things we've done have taken courage. I just think that it's helpful to contextualize it, because that's actually how you make it easier for yourself to live a life of principle, by going, well, what has happened in the past to people who've tried to stand up for what they believe in? Well, they all got destroyed, they got killed, they got burned, they got tortured, they got, right? None of that's happening to us. So let's not overdo the idea of courage. But I hear you. I think it does feel like it's courage. All I'm saying is, I think we should just remember the historical context, and that will make it easier for us to stick to our guns.
Yeah, fair enough. I think there's perspective that you have because of your heritage and because of your family background that you can offer here. Would you like to speak more about your relationship to your heritage as a Jew and as a Russian, and what parallels you might be seeing now?
Well, the Jewish side of me is kind of tangential, really. It's not something that I've ever really taken massively seriously. I found it a useful vehicle for doing comedy. When I was a comedian, I thought it was an interesting thing to add to the mix. But I'm not someone who introduces myself as Konstantin Kisin Jew when you meet me, right?
I do that.
He does that for me. So, you know, I actually genuinely think that our backgrounds are very interesting and useful as, let's say, the start of a conversation. Potentially when you meet someone for the first time and you go, oh, what's your background? But generally, the less we talk about it, actually, I think the better, particularly in these hyper-racialized times where everyone's obsessing about race. I'm actually moving in the opposite direction. Whenever people ask me to fill in a form with my ethnicity, I just put human nowadays, because I just don't want to give them any encouragement. But in terms of my Russian background, that's obviously much more influential, because that's a cultural thing as opposed to just an ethnicity. In my case, I'm not religiously Jewish. My family are Christians, you know, in terms of religion, because Jews were forced to convert in Russia. Anyway, long story, a long and painful story of the Jewish people all over the world. But in terms of the cultural thing, I think it's not even the fact that I am Russian. It's that I have an outsider's perspective on the West. That I think is much more interesting. Francis, likewise, you know, he can talk about his mum being from Venezuela and how that's shaped his perception. But the primary thing that being, I think, an outsider, or from outside at least, gives you is it gives you an appreciation of all the things that most people take for granted. And when you see a lot of people in the West attempting to, you're literally watching someone saw the branch on which they sit. It's quite frustrating as an outsider who can see that that's what's happening. And you go, maybe you should stop sewing that. And they get very upset.
And call you a racist.
They call you a racist, exactly. So that is a frustration. But I think also that perspective is useful, which is why I'm writing a book called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, which I think kind of gets across what I'm talking about there.
That's beautiful. I look forward to reading it. Yeah, I hear you on the outside perspective. I sort of have like a half and half, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, being the child of an immigrant who's from Iran, and having this gratitude instilled in me that you're lucky to be born in the Western world. Your mom moved here for a reason. And I'm realizing more and more that my peers who don't have that outside perspective, or 1 foot in, 1 foot out, they don't necessarily have the same gratitude and the same fervor to fight for freedom. And that actually brings me to my next question, which is, why do you think freedom or liberty has become such a dirty word in some circles?
Well, I would say, Sienna, that going back to your point, it's because there is this thing that I call Western privilege that people don't really understand, and that you have a real privilege that you're born in the West. You have real privilege that you live in a world where the tap water is clean, where if you drink the water from the tap, it doesn't make you ill. You live in a world where you can criticize the government. You're not going to get a knock on the door. You live in a world where you are able to walk around freely, you're able to worship freely. And because we have lived in this society where these freedoms are taken for granted, all of a sudden, we now face the problems we have, where people don't understand how lucky they are. Therefore, they're privileged. And when you say this to people, they look at you slack-jawed because if they can't get their head around it. But it's true. But when you talk to people who come from other cultures, who've experienced other cultures, who've lived in other cultures, particularly as in Russia or Venezuela or Iran, any of those cultures, they understand the gift of living in the West. Now, does it mean the West is perfect? Does it mean that, you know, all our lives are great? No, it doesn't. It still comes with challenges. No society is perfect. No culture is perfect. But what they're failing to understand is that where we live right now is a hell of a lot better than the 3 countries that I've just mentioned. And we should be grateful for that. But also as well, we need to understand that if this is all you know, then you think that this is what the world is like for the vast majority of people. And it's not. The reality is that we're privileged to live in the West. We're lucky to live in the West. And we don't have the basic fundamental struggles that the majority of human beings on this planet do.
And I think, Sienna, as well, people in the West don't realize that the prosperity, the security, the comforts, everything Francis just listed that we enjoy, it's not random. It's not accidental. It didn't just happen, right? It is the consequence of freedom. The prosperity we have in the West is the consequence of the fact that the Western societies essentially invented modernity. They invented the Enlightenment. They came up with this idea that actually we're not going to go down the religious dogma route. We are going to pursue science, the scientific method, right? We are going to pursue the truth, no matter which other existing dogmas it's counter to, right? We're going to find out whether the sun revolves around the earth or the other way around, no matter who it offends, no matter who's upset by this, no matter what people say, we're going to get to the bottom of the truth. And when we know that, when we understand the laws of physics better, we can create things that make us more powerful, that make us more prosperous, that make us more safe, etc. Right? So the things that we enjoy, all the things that Francis just listed, they are a product of freedom. But if you don't understand that, if you just think that the world is the way that it is and has always been the way that it is and will always be the way that it is, then you go, well, freedom has costs. And it does have costs, right? Because if I am free, that means that I might offend you, I might upset you, I might do things that you don't like, right? And they don't understand that if you take that freedom away, yes, you might be a little bit more secure, very apt in the current moment, but there will be long-term consequences to that that you're not taking into account. So I think the reason most people don't appreciate freedom and liberty is they don't understand that yes, it has costs. Of course it has costs, but it produces all of the benefits that we now enjoy, which will disappear if you take away people's freedom. And that's the part that they're missing. The things that you like will disappear the moment you take people's freedom away. And that's what they don't get.
Yeah, it brings to mind the freedom to and freedom from.
Right.
And in the Western world, and perhaps it's a little bit different in the UK than it is in the US, but from what you're observing in the Western world at large, what do we have freedom to do and what are we free from?
So you have freedom to worship, number one. You have freedom to, especially with women, you have freedom to choose the partner that you want to choose, to get married to whom you want to choose. We've just seen in Afghanistan now that I think it's girls over the age of 8 or 7 are not allowed to be educated. As a girl, you're allowed to be educated, you're allowed to pursue a career. Politically, there are so many freedoms that we take for granted here. So the reality is, like I said before, is that we're incredibly lucky. But one of the things that you see is how our freedom of speech is slowly being encroached. The Overton window is narrowing. A good example of this is big tech. We can see that if you go on YouTube and you say certain things which are very, very legitimate, which are, you know, if you talked about it or in a pub or a bar, acceptable. But if you mention it on YouTube, you'll get deplatformed, you'll get demonetized. And that is very worrying, that we have these huge companies deciding what is and what isn't acceptable to be spoken about. And these things are very elastic and they change over time. So another example would be, for instance, if you said at one point, like if we discussed on our YouTube channel that maybe the virus, the coronavirus was created in a lab in Wuhan, we would be demonetized, we'd have strikes against our channel. Now, that is seen as fair game. And it's just very worrying that there are these shadowy figures whom we don't know who they are, deciding what is and what isn't acceptable. And we all need to push back against this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Konstantin, you had mentioned science and progress through that avenue. What concerns do you have about perhaps, well, from my perspective, I see the science as being worshipped. It's almost like a god these days. Do you share that same concern? And if so, why?
Well, it's not science that's being worshipped, it's scientism. The people who advance the idea that we must follow the science are not people who behave in the scientific way, or the scientific method isn't something that they seem to subscribe to. The scientific method is the eternal questioning of preconceived ideas and dogmas and theories, right? The scientific method is about continually trying to improve our understanding. And the only way you do that is by stress testing your hypotheses, the ideas and theories that you have. That's not what's happening now. What's happening now is the belief that there are a few, as you say, priests who interpret this deity of science to us. And when one of these people, in your country, it's Anthony Fauci; in our country, it's various advisors to the Prime Minister, when they speak, they are interpreting the science for us. And we, the worshippers, are supposed to just bow down to it. That is not science. And we have seen the consequences of doing so. First, we were told masks don't work. Now everyone must wear them. The same thing about everything else. We could go down the list, and I think you and people listening and watching will know what I'm talking about. So that's not science. That's scientism. That is making science into some kind of religion. Both of my parents are scientists. They're both biochemical engineers. My father in particular, very highly qualified biochemical engineer. My grandfather was an astrophysicist. I understand what science is. It's not an abstract concept to me. And my family always brought me up to question things, to interrogate ideas, to interrogate concepts, and to look at the facts and the statistics that we're presented with. What we have now is not that at all. We have public health, which is essentially the idea that a few people know what all of us should do, and that you must suspend your own judgment and your own ability to think about things and to eschew fact and logic in favor of the narrative. That is not science, and we're not following the science in any way, as you've seen over the last 18 months.
And we, you know, and the government loves to say, specifically in this country, that they're following the science. But when scientists disagree with them, so for instance, there was this big debate about whether we should vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds, and the JCVI, the advisory board to the government when it comes to vaccinations, said to the government they would not advise them to do it because the risk to reward ratio does not make sense, i.e. the vaccines pose a bigger risk to this particular cohort than COVID. The government looked at their advice and went, well, we're still going to do it anyway. So you get to the point where you go, well, you're not following the science. And we've entered a territory where even the slogan that you parrot to us no longer makes sense. And once you enter that world, once you enter the world of what the government advises no longer makes sense, it's actually a very scary world for an ordinary person to be in, because you realize that the people in charge, they don't, in many ways, could be argued, have your best interest at heart, because they want to vaccinate kids when the scientists say, don't vaccinate them.
And I believe actually the same thing is about to happen in the United States as well, very much along the same lines. So yeah, the idea that we are following the science is absurd. It's the phrase following the science is what politicians do to avoid taking responsibility for political decisions that they make. That's all it is, right? It's a way of hiding behind the veneer of authority and science, when in fact all they're doing is they're making decisions that they make for their own reasons, and I don't want to speculate what they are, but that's all it is. So we should just stop pretending that we're following the science and go, we're following the politicians in doing what they think is the right thing based on their priorities. And I think anyone who's watched the last 18 months will be clear that their priorities seem to include things in addition to our well-being. They've got some other game going on that they're playing. What that is, I don't know exactly. But anyone who's watched the last 18 months and thought that politicians simply just want the public to be safe and healthy, I think would see that that isn't true.
Yeah, I hear you. I just pulled up a quote from your interview with Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying the other day, which was brilliant, by the way. And Heather said that in the science community, that the skepticism is not lauded, and instead it's the arrogance that is lauded. What do you think is going on in science and really in society at large that promotes the idea of skepticism as being bad and arrogance or certainty as being good?
I think it's because we live in a world of narratives, Sienna, where there are certain narratives that are given to us and then regurgitated. Trump is bad, Trump is evil, Trump is racist. Brexit is bad, Brexit is bad, Brexit is evil, Brexit is racist. The vaccines are a universal good. If you are critical of any aspects of the vaccine, you're automatically an anti-vaxxer. They love attaching labels. So this is the problem: is we think in the world of narratives. You follow the science, etc., etc., etc. So immediately, when you question a narrative, when there's one aspect of it that you don't agree with, automatically you become an outsider to your tribe. And then what happens is that's when the labels are used. You're thick, you're stupid, you're racist, you're an anti-vaxxer, we know all the different types of how epithets are hurled against these types, against people who question the narratives. And that is the problem, is that not enough people stand up and say, look, I don't agree with this aspect of it. I don't agree with that aspect of it. Why is it that this people say this, but then they do this? When you live in a world of narratives, you eliminate nuance, you eliminate critical thinking. And once that happens, you end up in a very dangerous place for society.
Yeah. And there is a certain dehumanization that comes with these labels, as you mentioned. I mean, I've even seen the label filth be attributed to the unvaccinated, which is really, really terrifying and concerning. There's a gentleman by the name of Charles Eisenstein. Are you familiar with him? He's an author and a speaker. He wrote an article the other day called "Mob Morality and the Unvaxxed." And it's a brilliant article. It's actually part of a whole series he's written looking to dissect the dehumanization that's happening around the pandemic and other issues, and then lead us to a better future, in essence. And the topic of mob morality and the unvaxxed, it really struck me, because in this world of narratives, and not really in the good sense of narratives and story, but in the sense of labeling people you disagree with as racists or filth even, what are your concerns around this dehumanization, and are you seeing any historical parallels that might be arising?
Well, the filth is just what we call the police in this country. But,
that's what I thought. I was going to say that.
Historically, even though I have a lot of respect for police officers, but that is how the police are often referred to.
Yeah, it's a particularly that's a London term as well.
Yeah,
mate, it's a filth. Let's leg it.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to be able to anymore. But yeah, look, I don't know about historical parallels. I can see that people are very worked up about it, and I agree. I think dehumanizing people is bad, always bad, and we have seen that happening with vaccination. But over the last 5 years, we've seen it with lots of other people. I remember having a conversation during the various campaigns around Brexit here in the UK, where people were being attacked with milkshakes. They were having things thrown at them, and
That happened to Andy No as well.
It happened to Andy No, and who was beaten up and assaulted, and a lot of people were quite happy with that because they didn't agree with Andy's particular politics or what he was doing, his work, etc. But my point is that we had very recently, only a few weeks ago, one of these advisors to our prime minister, who I mentioned earlier about the coronavirus, either the chief scientist or the chief health advisor, something like that. And a guy came up to him in the street and sort of hugged him and recorded but kind of forcefully. He was a bit uncomfortable, right? And all the newspapers and all the media said that this guy was evil and he'd assaulted Chris Whitty and all of the rest of it. Whereas these very same people were saying that milkshaking people is perfectly normal part of political discourse, right? So my point is this dehumanization, it's purely a tactic. Yeah, it's what you do to get your enemies, your political enemies, discredited. To get the other people not to take them seriously, to get other people to dismiss their ideas. It's simply a tactic. That's all it is. So treating unvaccinated people or people who are hesitant about taking the vaccine, or even saying that anyone who hasn't taken the vaccine is automatically an anti-vaxxer. Now, I haven't taken the vaccine. I'll tell you 2 reasons. Number one, I have natural immunity to COVID. So if I've not taken a vaccine because I already have better immunity, does that make me an anti-vaxxer?
Yes.
Or if I'm hesitant about taking the vaccine, even though I've taken 20 other vaccines, am I an anti-vaxxer? This is all pure propaganda. It's all pure sloganeering designed for one purpose and one purpose only, which is to dismiss the concerns that people have and to prevent other people from treating them as yet another human being whose opinion should be heard. And instead to go, well, these people, they're anti-vaxxers, that means they're evil. Let's push them out of the frame. Let's not let them into the conversation. I am very much pro-vaccine in general, right? On this particular one, I don't need it. I'm happy to wait until more longer-term trials are done. And that doesn't make me an anti-vaxxer. I think people should make their own decision about what they put in their body. And that will always be my opinion. I don't care what is happening out there, what great threat is coming. Human beings have an inalienable right to choose what they put in their body due to something called bodily autonomy. My body, my choice. That used to be the slogan that was particularly strong on the left. Somehow that's disappeared recently. I don't get it, but I think the dehumanization that you talk about is simply a tactic for political power. That's all it is.
And it's also as well, let's go back to the issue of milkshaking. That is a way to intimidate your opponent. It's the easiest trick in the book. And people go, well, it's not violence. Well, you know, but we can all agree that having milkshake thrown on you and your clothes ruined is not a particularly pleasant experience. Plus, there's a public humiliation. There's the photos. There's the sharing of it on social media. So it is intimidation, number one. Number two, it's a slippery slope. So you start with milkshake, then what happens? Then you throw something, then you throw an egg, and then the egg goes to rocks, etc., etc. So that particular action is indefensible. And anybody who defends those actions is essentially saying it's okay to intimidate an opponent, not by engaging with their ideas and beating them, but by humiliating them. And also, they're saying that later down the line, it's fair game to do something maybe a little bit rougher, because that's how these things work.
Yeah. Yeah, and the word intimidation is spot on, and it's actually a symptom, or it's a part of the cycle of abuse. The cycle of abuse is the honeymoon period. So politically, we see politicians show the best part of themselves and give us sort of a honeymoon period when they're running for office. Then there's the tension building, the incident. Then there's reconciliation and calm. And we repeat it. And when I identified the cycle of abuse, I think a lot of it was around the racial narrative and the pandemic. It took me a while to really catch on, but once I did, that was my breaking point. That was when I left the left for liberty. And I know that you don't quite, especially you, Konstantin, you say you weren't really on the left to begin with, but was there a moment when you knew for sure that you would not identify with this level of intimidation and with this group in any way?
Well, for me, I think it really crystallized around that contract situation when I saw how people who I thought were pro-freedom and particularly pro-freedom of expression, for creativity, etc., reacted to that. I went, okay, these people's brains are actually broken. Doesn't mean they're bad people. I don't think they're bad people. I don't think they're evil. I don't think that I don't think anything bad should happen to them, but their brains are broken. They're not capable of thinking logically about this. They're not capable of understanding the consequences of the decisions that they are advocating for. When I see people, particularly on the far left, advocate for an ideology that caused the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, when I see, young people in the West banging on about how brilliant communism is, when I lived through it and my family lived through it, particularly my family, then I go, okay, well, these people, they're not thinking clearly. They're regurgitating narratives, which we all do at some point, particularly when we're young, and a lot of them will grow out of it, and that's all very good. But I don't want to have anything to do with these people. And I think when I saw from the inside just how perverse the incentive structures are in comedy, in music, in film, in theater, in all of these different now essentially woke industries, increasingly education, obviously academia, etc. That's when I was like, well, these are not my people. And that's when, coming back to the very beginning of our conversation, that's when you find yourself outside the village. And then you go through a process of kind of working out what you think and why and what you want. And hopefully eventually you start heading back towards the village, but with a sort of more constructive mindset where you can, rather than feeling like you have to fight and win, you come into from a perspective of, well, I have something to say. And I know among you listening and watching this are people who are about to experience the same thing I've just been through, which is you don't fit in this village because the villagers have lost their minds, right? And you're going to go out of that village, and I'm going to help you if you want, and give you a few pointers and give you a few of the stops and signs on the way that you might want to look at. And that's it. There's no great battle to be fought, and no one needs to be exterminated or anything like that. It's just you come back to with a fresh perspective, and if other people want to take something away from that, it's there for them. But I don't feel like you're going to convert anyone who doesn't want to be converted. I think most people who want to leave the village know there's something rotten, and that's why they don't want to be there. And all it takes is for you to go, well, actually, here's a little door, and if you walk through it, things are going to be different. And people take their own journey from there.
Yeah. And Francis, what was the breaking point for you?
The breaking point for me with comedy is where people, I remember, working at, certain gigs, certain comedy clubs, and then, doing a joke and people going, yeah, I didn't like that joke. You go, oh, why not? And they went, yeah, because it sounds racist. I went, it's not racist. It's dealing with the topic of race, and I will go through every part of it. And they will go, yeah, but it sounds racist. And
it's just your voice, man.
Yeah, that part of it is my voice, it's my accent. But it gets to the point where it starts to limit self-expression, where the greatest form of self-censorship is where the greatest form of self-censorship is self-censorship. It's where you limit yourself, is where you aren't truly free. And the moment when you're sitting down, particularly as a comedian, and you want to write about all these different topics, and before you even put pen to paper, you think, oh, I can't go there, or I can't say that. You start really questioning, why is it that you're in this art form? Because there's no point in being in there if you can't be honest. And the moment that starts to happen, you go, well, if this is what it is, and this is all it is, then I don't want to do it anymore, because this isn't what I signed up for. There's more reasons not to be in a performing art, whether it's comedy or it's acting or writing or whatever it may be, than to be in it. Ferociously tough. The people at the top take the majority of money. We know the reasons why. But if you can't truly practice your art properly, then there's no point in being there. And that's when I felt it's come to a fork in the road now. I either do what I believe in, what I feel is right, and the type of comedy that I would like to see if I was a punter, or just go, you know what, the entire thing doesn't work anymore. That's a point that I came to.
Yeah, I hear you. I think a lot of artists are having that breaking point, and that's another theme I see among the community that I'm interviewing, is many of us are creatives in some way. And I do think that creatives have a certain quality of being driven and having a clear mission, or at least seeking a mission. Francis, you first, what would you say is your mission moving forward?
To piss as many people off as possible. No, I'm joking. What is what is my
so this is what I'm talking about when I talk about not being quite ready to go back to the village.
Yeah, I do. I want to go back to the village. I just want a can of petrol in each hand. That's all I want. No, I guess what is my mission? I want Trigonometry to be the best show in the world at what we do, which is to interview interesting people from with different points of view, be left, right, center, have experts in their field to come on, whatever that expertise may be, and for people to listen to it or watch it and come away going, you know what, I've learned something, or I've never considered the world like that. That's what I want. And for my comedy, I want it to be the very best it can be, to tackle issues that you wouldn't see tackled on TV, and for it to really make you laugh in a cathartic manner. And for then, after that, for you to go back to your life and go, you know what, that was a really funny hour of comedy. That's it.
Yeah. And Konstantin, what is your mission?
I don't know. It sounds very sort of egomaniacal to talk about your mission in this way. I don't really think about it in those ways. Not really. I just think I always try to be the best man I can be, the best husband I can be, at some point the best father I can be. And I think if you start there, everything else flows from that. I think these grand narratives about missions, they can be helpful and inspiring sometimes, but generally speaking, if you're being the best version of yourself, all else follows. And I think, to me, that's really been the priority, is to be the best person I can be. And I think everything else will naturally flow out of that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you guys for being with me today. This is really a treat, and I'm sure it will be a treat for our viewers as well.
Sienna, thank you so much for having us.
Cheers. Thanks, Sienna. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.